Our little secret, the human, the Centurion and the hybrid, no one can know about. On the Stellar Nexus, secrets can be more dangerous than plasma fire. For human security officer Steve White, one violet-eyed Centurion guard will turn a routine diplomatic assignment into the most dangerous and intimate mission of his life. What begins as a stolen moment in the shadows will ignite a chain of events that no treaty can contain. The violet eyes in the crowd. The Stellar Nexus hung in the void, like a crown of chrome and titanium, suspended at the crossroads of three great galactic civilizations. Its endless corridors gleamed under soft blue light, every polished surface reflecting starlight from the massive observation decks. Steve White's boots echoed against the deck plating. Each step measured his black tactical armor, a familiar weight on his frame. As a diplomatic security officer for the United Human Alliance, he'd walked the halls of power before planetside and in orbit. It was usually routine watchguard report. Today should have been the same, until he saw her. She stood at the edge of the Centurion delegation, black combat armor, hugging a lithe, lethal frame. Her skin was a metallic violet, catching the station's ambient glow like living metal. Long black hair tied back with military precision framed a face that could have been human, if not for the faint luminescent markings tracing delicate lines along her temples. And her eyes, deep liquid violet, sharp as a drawn blade. They found him across the room and held him there, ignoring the speeches, the trade disputes, the careful diplomacy. The gaze wasn't casual, it was deliberate, assessing. Steve forced himself to look away, tightening his grip on his security tablet. "Focus, White. You're here to work, not whatever this is." But every time he glanced back, she was still watching him. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a dangerous thought took root. This assignment isn't going to be routine after all. Maintenance closet rendezvous. The Stellar Nexus was winding down for the night cycle. The chrome and titanium arteries of the station, so alive with voices and footsteps, hours ago now thrummed only with the deep, steady heartbeat of the life support systems. Steve's patrol was routine. Check the maintenance points, scan the emergency hatches, verify security seals. His boots clanged softly on the metal decking as he passed a junction near the diplomatic wing's auxiliary corridors. The light here was dimmer, more utilitarian shadows stretching long across the walls. That's when he felt it. A flicker of movement in his peripheral vision, a presence. He began to turn, hand drifting toward the sidearm, holstered at his thigh, only to feel a sudden unyielding grip on his forearm. Before his brain could process, he was yanked sideways with surprising force. The world narrowed into a hiss of hydraulics and the click of a locking seal. The maintenance closet was barely 2 meters wide, lit only by strips of emergency crimson. The air smelled faintly of ozone and warm metal. And in the middle of that narrow space, standing far too close, was her. The Centurion guard. Her violet skin shimmered faintly under the red light and otherworldly glow that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of her breathing. The faint luminescent lines on her temples traced down toward her jaw, delicate and alien, and her black hair pulled back in a combat-perfect tail was a stark contrast against the armor plating on her shoulders. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she raised one finger, long, elegant, gloved, and pressed it to his lips. The gesture was firm, deliberate. The touch sent a jolt through him that had nothing to do with fear. "Hush!" she murmured, her voice carrying that low melodic Centurion resonance. "This will be our little secret. Promise me you won't tell anyone." His pulse kicked into a higher gear. Protocol says, eject her from the closet, demand an explanation file, an incident report. His instincts said otherwise. Up close, he could see the subtle textures of her armor, the faint heat radiating from her body. She smelled faintly of something metallic, yet sweet like burnt starlight, laced with spice. "I'm Lixia," she said, her breath grazing his cheek. "And you, Steve White, have been driving me to distraction all day." The fact she knew his name should have been alarming, Instead, it felt like gravity had shifted. "How do you?" he began. But she cut him off with a smile that was all predatory amusement. "I make it my business to know interesting humans, especially the ones who watch me the way you do." The moment stretched taut between them, and then she moved. Her hand found the edge of his chest plate, fingers curling with surprising strength. She closed the distance until there was no space left, until the hum of the station faded into the drumbeat of his own heartbeat. The kiss wasn't tentative. It was a strike, an ambush, a claim. Soft lips alien heat, the faint tang of something he couldn't name. His training told him to disengage, to regain control of the situation. But his hands betrayed him, finding her waist, pulling her closer. She broke away first, both of them breathing hard. A faint smirk played across her violet lips. Now she whispered, her eyes catching the red light. "Like molten amethyst, we both have something to hide." Before he could speak, she slipped past him, unsealing the door with a hiss, and was gone, leaving only the fading warmth of her presence and the unsettling realization that she had just started a game he wasn't sure he could win. The dangerous game. Steve had been on plenty of assignments where attraction blurred the lines between professional and personal. But never like this. The next morning, the diplomatic session resumed, another day of interspecies posturing over trade routes and resource rights. From his station at the rear of the human delegation, Steve scanned the room as he always did, checking exits, tracking movement, cataloging threats. And then inevitably he found her. Lixia stood near the Centurion High Council's representatives, her black armor gleaming under the conference hall's artificial sunlight. Her posture was perfect, weight-balanced stance, steady scanning the crowd with the same professional precision he was. Only this time, when their eyes met, she didn't look away. A small tilt of her head, a subtle curl at the corner of her lips. It lasted less than a heartbeat, but Steve felt it like a current under the surface, silent, controlled, undeniable. Over the next few days, the game took shape. They never acknowledged each other openly, never crossed the invisible lines of protocol in public. But they developed a language all their own. A brush of the shoulder in a passing corridor meant maintenance closet 10 minutes. A certain way she rested her hand on her sidearm told him which sector she'd clear of surveillance that day. The exact angle of her stance during a meeting was a signal for where and when they'd find privacy. The Stellar Nexus had over 3,000 blind spots, temporary glitches in its surveillance grid, designed into the system for maintenance access. With her Elite Guard clearance, Lixia could extend those blind spots just long enough for them to slip away unseen. She never triggered alarms, never left a trace. They met in narrow service corridors that smelled of ozone and machine oil, in darkened storage bays stacked with crates from half a dozen worlds, even in the observation decks that looked out over the unending sea of stars. Sometimes it was frantic hands tearing at clasps before the hatch was even sealed. Other times they drew it out, letting the tension coil until it snapped. It was dangerous, reckless, addictive. One evening during a particularly dull session on trade tariffs, Steve felt the faint buzz of his personal communicator. He glanced down. An encrypted message. C7 security feeds require manual inspection. 20 minutes. No signature, no need. Her clearance code was embedded in the transmission. He could already feel his pulse quicken as he imagined the quiet sector, the dim lighting, and Lixia waiting for him with that look, the one that always came just before she closed the distance. But the thrill wasn't just in the meetings, it was in not getting caught. Passing each other in full view of dozens of diplomats, exchanging the smallest glance while standing only meters apart, knowing what they'd been doing an hour before. It was a knife's-edge duty on one side, desire on the other. And every day, the balance tipped a little further toward danger. Pheromones and power plays. It started with a hostage crisis. The Andromedan Trade Summit was meant to be routine security sweeps, high-level talks, ceremonial dinners. Steve had already resigned himself to another day of keeping an eye on Lixia. From across the room, both of them locked in the same controlled tension they'd been feeding for weeks. Then the alarms hit. Red lights pulsed along the diplomatic wing as the station AI's calm voice cut through the rising murmur of panic. Security breach detected. Sector 7. All units respond. Steve was moving before the sentence finished, boots hammering against the deck plates. His calm crackled Lixia's voice slipping through all clipped professionalism, yet still with that undertone that always seemed to get past his armor. Multiple hostiles. Proxima Coalition insurgents. They've taken Ambassador Thex. Rendezvous checkpoint Delta. She was already there when he arrived. Combat rifle slung across her chest, black armor hugging her frame like a second skin. Her eyes flicked over him in a quick assessment, and despite the situation, the corner of her mouth twitched. "Focus human," she murmured, chambering around. "Though I have to say, you look dangerously appealing in full battle kit." He bit back a reply, forcing his mind on the mission. But every time their shoulders brushed as they moved, every time their breathing synced as they swept a corridor. The familiar pull was there, hotter now, wrapped around the sharp edge of adrenaline. They reached the conference hall's outer doors. Through the gap in the blast shutters, Steve caught sight of Thex's crystalline skin, reflecting the strobe of emergency lights, ringed by 3 armed insurgents. Energy rifles, unstable power packs, twitchy trigger fingers. Steve crouched behind cover, scanning for an opening. "We need a distraction," he muttered. Lixia glanced at him, something wicked sparking in her violet eyes. "Remember that little chemistry trick I showed you?" His gut tightened. "You're not serious." "Trust me," she whispered, a predatory smile playing over her lips. "Centurions have biochemical options." A moment later, she exhaled, deliberate, controlled, and Steve felt it instantly. That scent. Alien, intoxicating, threading into his brainstem like liquid fire. It wasn't just affecting him. The insurgents staggered their grips, faltering on their weapons. Thex's crystalline facets shimmered oddly, reacting to the charged air. And then the weapon's unstable cells began to spike. Steve didn't waste the chance. He moved 2 shots, one takedown, a sweep kick to disarm the third. Lixia was already in motion, dropping the second hostile with surgical precision. Less than 10 seconds later, it was over. The ambassador was safe. The insurgents cuffed, and Steve was trying very hard not to show just how much that pheromone release was still in his system. "Interesting tactic," he managed, voice rough. Lixia stepped closer, breath still hot from exertion. "Effective though, wasn't it?" And it was. Effective enough that within the week the Stellar Nexus High Council issued their decision. Steve White and Lixia would be assigned as a permanent high-risk diplomatic security unit. For the galaxy, it was recognition of an exceptional professional partnership. For them, it was a license to stand shoulder to shoulder and to keep playing with fire. The summit pressure. The Galactic Peace Summit was the kind of event that kept security teams up at night. 23 species, 2 weeks of negotiations, centuries of grudges, contested borders and fragile treaties, all jammed into the same orbiting station. For Steve and Lixia, it meant something worse than the threat of violence. It meant proximity, constant proximity. From the moment the summit began, they were side by side, patrolling hallways, sweeping meeting rooms, escorting ambassadors, briefing junior guards. Always close enough to feel the heat from each other's armor, never close enough to do anything about it. The rules were strict. Surveillance at maximum. No unexplained gaps in the cameras. No unscheduled absences from assigned posts. Even Lixia's elite clearance couldn't hide them now. Every move was logged. Every breath potentially observed. The tension grew fast. In the conference chamber, she'd stand across the room, her eyes finding him between speeches. A small shift of her hips, the faint flex of a calf muscle in her combat stance. Subtle, deliberate design to get under his skin. Steve retaliated in kind. During training sessions for the auxiliary security teams, he demonstrated close-quarters drills that highlighted every movement of his body. The armor only emphasized the lines of muscle underneath. He didn't need to look at her to know she was watching. He could feel it like static before a lightning strike. It became a war of restraint, a war they were both losing. Halfway through the first week, they were running a demonstration in the central gym for a mixed-species group of cadets. Lixia was explaining the importance of anticipating your partner's movements when she stepped back against him, her spine pressing flush to his chest in the perfect defensive stance. This, she told the class, is how you maintain full spatial awareness of your teammate. Steve could barely breathe. The warmth of her back seeped through 2 layers of armor. Her voice vibrated against him. The cadets took notes, oblivious. By the end of the session, his pulse hadn't slowed, and neither had hers. That night, as he checked the rosters for the next day, his communicator pinged an encrypted message. Not the usual rendezvous code, just one word dying. He found her leaning against the observation deck railing, the stars casting silver light over her metallic violet skin. 2 weeks of this, she murmured, not looking at him. 2 weeks of watching you in that armor and not being able to touch you. It might actually kill me. Steve kept his voice level. Focus on the job. But his hands were already curling into fists at his sides, just to keep from reaching for her. By the second week, the strain began to show in more dangerous ways. During one combat drill, Lixia's biochemistry spiked, an unintentional pheromone release that rippled through the trainees. Several lost focus, completely making obvious mistakes. She brushed it off with a faint smile, but Steve saw the flicker of concern in her eyes. Something was happening to her. Something beyond the normal game they'd been playing. The secret, the Peace Summit, was in its final stretch, and the air aboard Stellar Nexus felt heavier than recycled oxygen had any right to be. Steve chalked it up to exhaustion, to the strain of holding the line for 2 relentless weeks without a single moment to breathe, let alone to touch her. But Lixia was different. She moved a fraction slower. Her usual razor-sharp guard stance wavered at odd times. Her eyes still burned with that familiar violet fire. But there was something else behind them, something unsettled. He noticed it first during a late-night patrol. They were walking a quiet service corridor, boots echoing in sync. The station outside the viewports was just a black void, dotted with distant suns. Then, mid-step, she faltered. One hand went to the wall, the other to her abdomen. Steve was at her side instantly. "You okay?" "Fine," she said too quickly. "Just strange reactions lately. Probably from suppressing my natural responses to you for too long." She was smiling when she said it, but it didn't reach her eyes. That smile was still lingering when she left patrol early that night. He found her an hour later, alone in a dimmed maintenance bay, a small handheld medical scanner glowing in her palm. The expression on her face wasn't fear exactly, more like disbelief fighting to become panic. "We need to talk," she said, voice quieter than he'd ever heard it. Steve stepped closer. "What's going on?" She turned the scanner so he could see the readings. Strange double helix overlays, blinking compatibility markers he didn't recognize. "Remember how Ambassador Thex mentioned Centurion human compatibility studies?" she said slowly. His pulse kicked up. "Yeah." Apparently she continued the studies underestimated us. Steve's mind processed the data a beat before his mouth caught up. "You're saying—" "I'm pregnant," she said flatly, "with what appears to be a human-Centurion hybrid." The words landed like a plasma bolt. He stared at her, at the scanner, then back again. "That's possible." "Apparently so. It wasn't supposed to be. This," she tapped the scanner, "wasn't part of the plan. The biochemical reactions I've been having. They're not from restraint. They're pregnancy symptoms." Steve took a step back, the corridor spinning just slightly. "That's not just a complication, Lixia. That's a secret." She cut in sharp now. "One that absolutely cannot get out. Not until I figure out how to handle it. You understand, no one knows. Not your people, not mine, not anyone." Her hand unconsciously shifted to her midsection. The gesture was small, but it hit him harder than the announcement had. Steve swallowed. "And what does this change between us?" Her gaze hardened. "Nothing. It's still what it's always been, pure pleasure. No complications." But neither of them believed that. Accelerated crisis. From the moment Lixia said the word pregnant, time began to move differently. At first, Steve expected weeks, months before anything changed. But within days, it was obvious this wasn't following any human or Centurion timetable. The subtle curve of her abdomen appeared almost overnight, and her biochemistry went into overdrive. Her pheromones, always potent to him, became almost overwhelming. Walking beside her on patrol felt like balancing on the edge of a blade. Every brush of her arm against his sent a spike of heat through him. Every glance lingered too long, and even the air seemed charged between them. And it wasn't just him. 3 junior security cadets failed their combat drills because they couldn't focus while she was in the room. One Andromedan envoy stumbled over a speech mid-sentence when she passed behind Steve during a meeting. Lixia laughed it off, but he saw the flicker of worry behind her grin. "It's like my body's tuned to you," she said one night during a quiet sweep, "and everyone else is just catching the overflow." It didn't help that his instincts toward her had shifted. In combat, Steve had always been controlled, precise professional. Now, the idea of someone threatening her was enough to make his vision narrow. During a minor security incident at a trade reception, a drunken delegate staggered too close, and Steve was on him in a flash, too fast, too forceful. Lixia had to put a hand on his chest to stop him. "I'm pregnant, not helpless," she said afterward in her quarters, her tone sharp. But then her voice softened. "I don't need you to protect me." He stepped closer before he realized it, the air between them alive with heat. "It's not about needing me. It's instinct." For a moment, her violet eyes held his without the usual teasing edge. "Yeah," she murmured, "I know the feeling." But the speed of the pregnancy wasn't slowing. Her next check-in with the station medbay was supposed to be routine. Instead, the scanner readings spiked so high, Dr. Reeves had to recalibrate twice. Lixia deflected every probing question, insisting it was just a Centurion condition. Steve could see the truth. Her biology was shifting daily, the hybrid's growth rate accelerating beyond anything natural. And with each change, her scent, her heat, her presence became more intense. The connection between them, once a game, then a compulsion, now felt like a live current running under his skin. The moment of reckoning came without warning. Gamma shift. The station was quiet corridors, dimmed to night cycle levels. Steve was in his quarters reviewing security feeds when the station AI's voice cut through. "Medical emergency, Section 4. Immediate response required." He didn't wait for details. He knew. He found her in a maintenance corridor, one knee on the deck, one hand braced against the wall, her violet skin pale and glistening with sweat. Her breath came in ragged bursts. "It's too soon," she gasped, reaching for him. "Something's wrong." Steve scooped her into his arms without hesitation, feeling the heat radiating from her, as if she were burning up from the inside. "We're going to Dr. Reeves, now." Her fingers clutched at his armor. "No, can't reveal the secret." "Damn the secret," he growled, moving faster. "I'm not losing you, either of you." By the time they reached the medbay, alarms were already blaring for emergency lockdown. Dr. Reeves took one look at Lixia and activated full privacy protocols. The monitors lit up with frantic readings, hybrid cellular structure in biochemical cascade, human and Centurion DNA in conflict. And then Reeves turned to Steve with the question he'd been avoiding. "What species is the father?" He didn't hesitate. "Human me." Blood bond. The words were out before Steve could think about the consequences. "Humane me." Dr. Reeves froze for half a second, just long enough for surprise to flicker across her professional mask before snapping back into motion. "That explains the genetic instability," she said, scanning the holographic readings. "The hybrid's development rate is overwhelming Centurion metabolic limits. We need to stabilize the reaction now, or both patient and child will crash." Lixia gritted her teeth through another wave of pain, violet skin paling to a dangerous shade. Her eyes, those fierce, unyielding eyes, found his, and held them even as sweat traced glowing lines along the markings on her temples. "Don't look at me like that," she managed between breaths. "This wasn't supposed to happen." Steve stepped closer, gripping the side of the bed, his voice low but firm. "We'll talk about supposed to later. Right now, we keep you alive." Reeves moved fast, pulling up a bank of sterile vials and a portable blood filter. "If the human DNA is the destabilizing element, we might be able to regulate the reaction by introducing human antibodies directly from the source." Steve didn't need it explained twice. "Do it. You understand. This is experimental. Do it," he repeated, already rolling up his sleeve. The medbay lights seemed too bright as the needle slid in his blood drawn, filtered, enhanced with nanoprocessors, then fed into a separate IV that snaked toward Lixia's arm. He watched the line of crimson thread toward her, disappearing under her skin. She flinched at the first rush of warmth, her hand tightening on the bedding. Without thinking, Steve caught it. "Talk to me," she demanded suddenly, her voice edged with both command and desperation. "Distract me. Tell me about the first time you saw me." He almost smiled. "You mean the moment you were standing in the crowd, staring at me like you already knew what was going to happen?" Her lips twitched, half smirk, half grimace. "I was assessing. Centurion instinct, determining compatibility." "Uh-huh," he said, brushing a stray lock of hair back from her damp forehead. "You were plotting to pull me into a closet." A breath that might have been a laugh escaped her. "Maybe." The monitors began to change spikes, leveling out the rapid flicker of the hybrid's vitals, slowing into something steady, rhythmic. Reeves checked the readings and gave a tight nod. "Stabilizing. Hold position, Officer White." He didn't move, not even when Lixia's grip on his hand loosened, replaced by something gentler. Her breathing slowed, the tension in her muscles ebbing away. "Almost there," Reeves murmured. "The biochemical cascade is resolving." When the pain finally eased from her face, she closed her eyes for a moment. "You humans, always throwing yourselves into danger." Steve squeezed her hand once before letting go. "It's not danger when it's for you." The doctor was already preparing for the next stage. "She's going to deliver within hours. Whatever's driving this accelerated gestation is still active, but at least now it's under control." Steve stayed right there, ready for whatever came next, because this wasn't just adrenaline or pheromones anymore, not after holding her hand through that, and neither of them could pretend otherwise. A family under fire. The medbay had been sealed for hours. Outside, the Stellar Nexus went about its routine. Inside, the air was thick with tension and the sharp, sterile scent of medical antiseptic. Steve stood at Lixia's side, one hand resting on the bed frame, the other unconsciously hovering near the hilt of his sidearm. He'd faced firefights, boarding actions, and assassination attempts. None of it had his pulse racing like this. The moment the hybrid child entered the world, the room changed. A pale lavender skin tone, softer than Lixia's metallic violet, glowed faintly under the medbay lights. Tiny fingers curled instinctively strong despite their size. The eyes fluttered open, one iris Centurion violet, the other unmistakably human green. Steve didn't realize he'd been holding his breath until it escaped in a rough exhale. Lixia, for once, didn't hide the emotion in her voice. "He's perfect." Even Dr. Reeves, ever the professional, paused to study the newborn with quiet awe. "First confirmed human Centurion hybrid. This will." No, Lixia cut in sharply, her tone snapping like a blade. "This doesn't go in any report. Not yet. Promise me." Reeves hesitated, then nodded. "Understood. But you won't be able to hide him forever." Steve glanced down at the child. The thought of him becoming a research subject made something cold settle in his gut. "Then we don't give them the chance." For a few fleeting minutes, there was peace, just the three of them in a rare, quiet bubble of calm. But it didn't last. The medbay doors pulsed red, the station AI's voice cutting through the stillness. "Unauthorized access attempt detected. Quarantine breach, medical sector." Steve's body moved before his brain could catch up. Instincts sharpened to a lethal edge. "Stay with them," he ordered Reeves, already drawing his weapon. The breach alarms were still sounding, when he reached the outer corridor and saw them. 3 figures in stealth suits, sleek matte black with adaptive camo shifting across their surfaces, working in unison to bypass the medbay's security. Their movements were precise, professional. Genetic pirates. The kind who'd kill or abduct without hesitation for something as rare as what lay in that medbay. The thought of them touching his son made his vision narrow to a tunnel. "Wrong door," Steve growled. He hit them hard, a controlled explosion of violence. The first pirate went down with a rifle butt to the helmet, the second crumpled from a knee to the ribs, and a precise stun shot. The third tried to retreat until a violet blur cut across Steve's field of vision. Lixia, still weak from the birth but moving with lethal grace, she slammed the last attacker against the bulkhead, her blade at his throat before he could even reach for a weapon. "You came for the wrong child," she hissed. The corridor was silent, except for their ragged breathing. Station security arrived seconds later, finding the 3 pirates unconscious, and the human Centurion security team standing over them like a pair of predators guarding their den. Later in her quarters, they stood side by side, watching their son sleep in a portable incubator, soft light bathing his small, strange face. Lixia spoke first, her voice lower than a whisper. "I never wanted this, not a child, not feelings, but now." Steve looked at her, saw the same mix of fear and fierce determination in her eyes that he felt in himself. "Now we protect him, both of you, no matter what." And for the first time since that maintenance closet encounter, they weren't just playing a dangerous game. They were a family at war. No longer just physical, the station had gone quiet again, but the stillness was deceptive. Somewhere in its vast humming corridors, rumors were already forming about a mysterious medbay lockdown, about unconscious intruders found in the medical sector. The story would spread, it always did. But here, in the dim glow of Lixia's private quarters, the only sound was the soft, steady breathing of their newborn son. Steve stood near the incubator watching the tiny lavender-skinned figure shift in his sleep. Every detail was a fusion of worlds, the Centurion markings faint along his temples, the human curve to his jawline, the mismatched eyes that would one day open and make someone else's heart stutter, the way Lixia's once had made his. Behind him, he felt her presence before he heard her steps. Lixia moved like a shadow, though now her armor had been replaced with loose station fatigues. Even without the combat plating, she carried herself like the elite guard she was, every line of her posture honed and deliberate. "It was supposed to be simple," she said quietly. "No strings, no consequences, just..." She trailed off, searching for the word. Steve didn't turn pleasure. A humorless laugh escaped her. "That's what I kept telling myself, even when I kept finding excuses to cross your patrol route. Even when I reprogrammed security blind spots for us. Even when she cut herself off, eyes drifting to the incubator. Now I'm terrified, because this isn't just chemistry anymore." He turned then, closing the space between them. Was it ever? For a moment, neither spoke. The weight of everything they'd been co-conspirators, sparring partners, lovers, settled between them like an unspoken truth. Then she lifted her gaze to his violet eyes, sharp but unguarded. "I love you," she whispered, the admission landing between them like another dangerous secret. He didn't hesitate. "I love you too, both of you." Her smirk returned, softened, but still carrying that glint of mischief. "That's going to raise some eyebrows in the diplomatic corps." He stepped closer until their foreheads touched. "Let them wonder." From the incubator, their son stirred, a small sound escaping him. Lixia's hand found Steve's without thought, their fingers locking with the same unconscious precision they used in combat. They stood there in silence, a united front around something far more precious than classified data or fragile treaties. Outside these walls, the galaxy might see them as the Stellar Nexus's most dangerous security duo. Inside, they were something rarer and infinitely more dangerous to the balance of power. A family. Some secrets, Lixia murmured, watching their son's mismatched eyes blink open for the first time are worth keeping. No matter the risk, Steve couldn't agree more. What had started as a stolen moment in a maintenance closet had become a bond no one in the galaxy could legislate, regulate, or erase, and anyone who tried would learn exactly what happened when a human and a Centurion fought for the same cause.